We go slightly back in the timeline to March of 1204, where we follow Reen Sworza get off at Trista Station and enter the Thor's Military Academy ceremony. Principal Van Dyke welcomes the Thor students by explaining the principles the school upholds from its opening 220 years ago by Emperor Drykos after bringing an end to the civil war in Erebonia. The ceremony finishes with instructors picking up their students, though 9 students in red uniforms are left behind. That is until the instructor takes them to the abandoned schoolhouse near the rear of the campus for the class to complete their special mission. She introduces herself as Sarah, and that the 9 students make up Class 7, a brand new class that is both a mix of nobles and commoners. Their assignment involves getting through the maze in one piece, though Reen decides to partner up with 2 boys named Elliot and Gaius. They make a decent distance into the maze until Elliot is about to get attacked from behind, though luckily a 4th boy known as Marcus prevents the monster from attacking before joining their group. As the group ventures further, they pass a trio of girls consisting of Laura, Emma, and Elisa. Shortly after, they encounter Fee, who estimates that they are about halfway through the maze. The final student they come across is Eustace. Eventually, all 9 find the boss to the maze, where they are successful in slaying the beast. That's when Sarah congratulates the class for completing their assignment before offering any students to be placed in another class, though all students happily accept to remain in Class 7. Reen attends class, where they learn more about the War Alliance by Instructor Thomas, until at the end of the day, Sarah requests Reen to run a little errand. Before entering the Student Union building, Reen comes across an upperclassman who performs a trick on Reen, stealing a 50 mira coin. Reen then enters the Student Council, where he is greeted by Toa, the Student Council President. She then thanks Reen for volunteering to help the council body. The next morning, Reen is tasked with investigating the old schoolhouse as mysterious occurrences have been reported within the lower floors. After clearing the enemies, Reen reports back to Van Dyke, who explains that the building was built during the Dark Ages, so it's possible that some lingering magic still remains. Class 7 then begin their field studies, with the class being split up into 2 groups. Reen's group will be travelling to Celtic, with the other group going to Palm. After completing their tasks, the group notices 2 men arguing in the marketplace, where they break up the argument. Otto, the market manager, thanks the students for their intervention before explaining that the origin of the argument is over the permit of the stall. Though both permits are valid, this means Duke Albaraya, the ruler of the Cruzan region, has approved both permits by mistake. It doesn't help either that the Duke has recently increased the tax of sales, putting the merchants on edge. However, Otto can't understand why the provisional soldiers didn't handle the argument, for it's their job to maintain the peace of the region. The group head to the inn for the night, though before going to sleep, Laura asks Reen why he holds back in battle. She's aware that he is using the 8 leaves 1 blade technique, though Reen confesses that although he began training with his master, Young Confai, he only got as far as being a beginner before his training was cut short. The next morning, the 2 men from the market are arguing again as both their stalls have been looted and destroyed. Though this time the Provisional Army steps in, where they deduce that both men are responsible for the stall destruction, the class then voice their concern for them jumping to conclusions without an investigation. However, the soldiers dismiss their worries, for they have more important matters to attend to. After getting permission from Otto, the group begin their investigation. With no witnesses and both the stalls getting destroyed in the process, suspicion lands on the Provisional soldiers. Class 7 then heads towards Lunia Nature Park, where they find the rangers with the stolen goods from the 2 merchant stalls. After defeating the rangers, they hear a whistle before a giant monster appears and attacks the group, though Reen's group is able to successfully defeat the monster. That is when the Provisional Army appears to apprehend the students. However, soldiers from the Railway Military Police arrive and take over the case and arrest the thieves. That's when Captain Claire introduces herself to Class 7 before taking them back to the village. That night, the group return back to Trista as they reflect on their field study. We then spot a bespectacled man and another masked figure looming in the distance as they are surprised for Claire to make an appearance, though ultimately it doesn't change their plans all too much. Back at Thor's, Marcius feels betrayed by Reen after he lied about being a noble. Granted, what Reen said previously wasn't a lie as he has commoner blood, but was adopted by Baron Swartz, who rules over Ymir. Reen later bumps into his upperclassman again and another student called Angelica, the daughter of Duke Rogner. She soon rides her orbal bike away, where we finally get the upperclassman's name being Crow. Crow reveals that Angelica, Toa, George, and himself were actually part of Class 6 last year, the prototype version of what Class 7 ended up becoming. After clearing another floor of the abandoned schoolhouse, a black cat appears to be watching the group. The students then report their findings to Van Dyke, who proposes the schoolhouse is hiding something related to Drykos, as he ordered the building to be protected until the promised day arrives. As Reen heads back to the dorm, he meets the same cat from before. Though it ends up scratching him, Emma notices this wound and apologizes before getting the first aid kit. The next morning, Sarah reveals the class's next field trip, with Reen's group going to Bereahad and the other group going to St. Ark. When the group arrives in Bereahad, Eustace's older brother Rufus greets the group before escorting them to the hotel where they will be staying at. Marcius and Eustace try establishing a link while on a monster extermination, though this fails with the 2 blaming each other. From their bickering, Reen ends up getting damaged from a beast. After his defeat, Emma then whispers an incantation to heal Reen. While the group heads closer to Auroch's fort, they then see a train full of provisional tanks being transported. The group questions Eustace why Bereahad is requiring so many tanks. He then explains that it's the nature of the political situation in Erebonia, with tensions between the noble and reformist faction growing every day. While returning to the city, they hear sirens trigger from the fortress as they witness a white object fleeing away. They eventually make their way back to the hotel before Duke Alborea speaks with his son, reminding him to maintain the Alborea image while in the city. While having dinner, the group is interrupted by a familiar-looking man who introduces himself as Blanc before wishing the group a good last day while they visit. However, the group is confused by this as they never told the man that piece of information. That night, Rean and Eustace struggle to sleep and begin to talk. Eustace confides with Rean that his relationship with his father is distant, as Eustace is not a pure noble as his mother was a commoner. Eustace was only raised by the Duke after his mother died, though luckily he has Rufus, who he has a close relationship with. Though unaware, Marcius was listening to Eustace explain his struggle of being a noble. The next day, Eustace is summoned by his father while the group complete a monster examination. That is until Marcius is arrested by the provisional soldiers as being the suspect who snuck into Auroch's fortress the day prior. Even with the student's alibi to prove otherwise, Marcius is taken into custody. While discussing what to do, a familiar man with blonde hair speaks loud enough that the group can hear him. The man mentions how the sewers would be full of monsters now as the soldiers are preoccupied. The group make their way to the sewers entrance where Emma unlocks the gates with another incantation. They eventually meet up with Eustace, who plans on freeing Marcius as well. The four make their way until a door blocks their path. Fee then blows the door up and later reveals that she was a Jaeger before joining Class 7. They manage to save Marcius, though before the provisional army can do anything, Rufus saves the group after being told the situation from Sarah. While the class heads back to Trista, a blue-haired girl watches them and reports her finding Selecta before flying away on her white object. With midterms approaching, the group begins to study. The Ring eventually spots a maid while heading back to the dorm. After completing their exams, the group is introduced to the maid who goes by Sharon, who is also the servant for the Rhineford family. Elisa is frustrated by this, as this was the first time in her life that she was able to have some independence, but now that is ruined with Sharon's arrival. Class 7 manages to score the highest average over the exam. This causes Patrick from Class 1 to challenge the class to a duel. Although he is defeated, Patrick begins to express his frustration to losing to commoners. Though Gaius is confused by this frustration, as back in Nord, there is no such class system, so he doesn't comprehend the idea that nobles are somehow superior to commoners. Sarah later reveals their next field study. Reen's class will be going to the Nord Highlands, while the other group visits Brionia Island. The two groups make their way to Heimdall Station before separating, though a girl with purple hair notices the group. That is when a blonde girl catches up to her and begins to tease her. Though Claire then begins to escort the two away. While the group transfers to another train in Roa, they are briefly introduced to Irina, Elisa's mother and head of the Rhineford company, though their meeting is short-lived as Irina is an extremely busy woman. They eventually make their way to Zenda Gate, where they get introduced to General Zex. They are then offered horses to traverse the highlands. After a far distance on horseback, the group finally meet the nomads of Nord, including Gaius' family. Gaius' father then shares the history of their relationship with the Empire, as it dates back all the way to the War of the Lions, when Emperor Drykos recruited allies from the region. Though Nord is in a similar position to Crossbell by being sandwiched between two superpowers, it can often feel paranoia for the nomads of a possible invasion between the two. The next day, the group is tasked with escorting a journalist to a giant statue within Nord. However, not even Gaius knows much about the statue aside from it being believed to be the guardian of Nord. Eustace then shares how it reminds him of a legend of the Great Knights that helped out during the War of the Lions. However, Reen seems to have some kind of reaction to the statue. Though when the group returns to the settlement, the orbital track has broken down. The nomads then request the group to retrieve a man in the north who comes from the Empire who's skilled with orbments. That's when the group is introduced to Gwyn, Elisa's grandfather and former chairman of the Rhineford Company. They bring the man to the settlement, though again the group is being actively watched by the blue-haired girl. That night, Elisa opens up to Reen about her family situation. She used to have a normal home life, but that changed 8 years ago when her father passed away. Her mother changed and went from being family-oriented to work-oriented. It's thanks to Gwyn and Sharon that she was able to grow up to the person that she is today. However, Elisa is concerned for the Rhineford Company as her mother is so preoccupied with making profits, it's led her to make questionable decisions like the agreement to install the railway cannons at Gorelia Fortress. All of a sudden, there's an attack at the Calvard's base shortly before the Imperial Watchtower also gets attacked. Airships from both the Empire and the Republic are on high alert at the border, with Gaius' family planning to relocate to avoid a possible invasion. Zex wants Class 7 to leave as it's believed Calvard is planning an invasion, though this doesn't make sense as Calvard's base experienced more damage compared to the Imperial's watchtower. Gaius manages to convince the general to give the group 2 hours to investigate the cause. While investigating, Gaius shares his passion for protecting Nord as a travelling priest had educated him on the geopolitical struggle between Erebonia and Calvard when he was younger. After the investigation, they deduce a third party must be responsible for both attacks. The first piece of evidence for this is that the watchtower was damaged using Rhineford mortar shells. The second piece of evidence is that the watchtower was damaged at an angle that indicated that the shot was taken at Nord. Based on this angle, the group manages to find the original mortars that were responsible for the attack. That is before the blue-haired girl makes her appearance. The group chases her down where she explains that it's a misunderstanding that she was not responsible but rather a group of Jaegers. She introduces herself as Milliam and claims that the Jaegers made their way to the north, so the two group up to take them down. The group make their way to some ruins where they are confronted with the Jaegers and a man known as Gideon. The man is familiar with the students, as they were the ones responsible for getting in the way of their plan back in Celtic. After defeating the Jaegers, Gideon uses a flute to call upon a monster. They manage to defeat the beast, though Gideon gets away. After bringing back the Jaegers to Zex, Captain Lecter manages to negotiate with the Republic, explaining what happened. Afterwards, Gideon meets with the same masked man, where although their plan was foiled again, the masked man still believes that they are still making progress on their end goal. The two then fly away. That's when Sarah is seen spying on the conversation, though Sarah calls the other spy out, this turned out to be Sharon. She then asks Sharon how the two were able to obtain a Rhineford airship, though the maid claims that there are no records of the airship ever existing. We open the chapter with a meeting between Osborne and Claire. She informs him of what had transpired at Nord and how they failed to capture the mastermind. She then predicts that the terrorists will attack next at the West Sumerian Conference in Crossbell. Speaking of the conference, we then see Oliver talking to his younger brother Cedric about the conference as well. Though Cedric is anxious about being the Crown Prince, as he feels it's impossible to live up to Emperor Eugene's reputation. However, Oliver reassures his brother as he explains how Princess Claudia of Liberl had very similar feelings at one point as well. That's when Alfin, Cedric's twin sister, interrupts their conversation, changing the topic to whom she wishes to dance with at the upcoming garden party. Back at Thor's, Class 7 is having a swimming lesson when multiple students question Reen about the scar on his chest, though he himself doesn't know the cause, for as long as he can remember he's always had it. Laura then challenges Fee to a competition where she demands the ex-Jaeger to put her all into it. Laura just barely wins, though Laura questions why Fee doesn't put her full effort into things, though the answer just annoys Laura further. Later on, Reen catches Emma talking to someone, though when he turns around the corner, he just sees it's the cat he previously met. Emma then introduces the cat as Celine. After clearing another floor at the old schoolhouse, the class come across a red door that shows no signs of opening, though Reen hears a voice emanating from the door but shrugs it off. Upon returning to the surface, the same purple-haired girl approaches Class 7 and introduces herself as Elise, Reen's sister. Elise and Reen have a private conversation where she is concerned over his most recent letter. This is because Reen doesn't feel worthy enough to succeed as the next Baron of Ymir after tarnishing their father's reputation. This is because, as Reen was adopted into the Swarzritter family, nobles believed that their father was unfaithful by having a child with another woman. However, Elise leaves the conversation upset with Reen. That is until she finds herself approaching the old schoolhouse. Crow informs Reen that he saw his sister approach the old schoolhouse, and when the two run towards it, they find Patrick. Elise ends up following Celine into the schoolhouse before approaching the door where the first trial begins. Reen, Crow, and Patrick catch up to Elise where they witness a giant suit of armour about to attack Elise. Reen then triggers his org power where, with the assistance of Crow, they were able to defeat the monster. The next field study we have the whole class visiting Heimdall, as the Imperial capital is too big for one group to visit. Upon visiting Heimdall, Governor Regnitz introduces himself to the group before handing over their assignments. Reen's group makes their way to Alto Street, where we get introduced to Elliot's sister, Fiona, while visiting their home. The group later find out that Elliot's father is Lieutenant General Olaf of the 4th Armoured Division within Ereboni's military. The group make their way to their accommodation, which is an old bracer guild. While accepting a monster extermination request at the hotel, they come in contact with Vita, a famous opera singer. While exterminating the monster, a similar situation from before happens with Laura and Fee unable to form a link during battle. Thanks to Elliot's musical ear, the group find a secret exit that leads them to Meter Park. Elliot then reunites with his old classmates who have attended a music academy. When they return to Elliot's home, the group see how passionate Elliot is about music and ask why he enrolled at Thor's instead of a music academy. Elliot then reveals that his mother was a famous pianist who sparked his love for music. However, she passed 7 years ago, and so both Elliot and Fiona wished to follow in her footsteps. Although Fiona was allowed to do this, Olaf refused Elliot to do the same as he believed that his son should get a career within the military. As a result, Elliot enrolled at Thor's as it was the only military academy that also had music classes. Later that night, Laura challenges Fee to a duel to try and sort out their feud, though in the end, both girls are left exhausted with Fee giving Laura the victory. Fee later gives her backstory, where as a child she was abandoned and it wasn't until she was taken in by a man called the Jaeger King. She viewed this man as the closest thing to a father, though after getting to know the other Zephyr Jaegers, she joined their ranks. However, last year her father died in a battle against the war god of their rival Jaeger Corps, the Red Constellation. With the death of the Jaeger King, Zephyr disbanded as there wasn't anyone who could replace their leader. As a result, Fee was alone again. That was until Sarah came along as she was following the rivalry between the two Jaeger Corps. She then invited Fee to the academy to provide her the opportunity to figure out what she wanted to do. Laura and Fee are then able to create a successful link where they are able to defeat both Reen and Marcius before sleeping things over. The next day, the group end up at the Osh district, where they visit Marcius' home. The group notice a family photo where they ask who the woman is in the photo. That's when Marcius explains that it's his cousin. Because she was 9 years older than Marcius, he saw her more like a sister. However, she died 6 years ago. This is because she fell in love with a noble. Her fiancé's family wanted nothing to do with her as she was a commoner, so they began to harass her, making her life a living hell. This resulted in her killing herself. This then birthed Marcius' hatred towards the nobility, and when Regnitz began to ally himself with Osborne. Regnitz then calls the group, informing them of a robbery that has taken place, with the calling card requesting Reen's group to solve the mystery. Eventually, the group finds the lost goods and LeBlanc introduces himself to the group before vanishing. Afterwards, the two groups reunite at St. Estrella, where they have tea with Princess Elphin before Prince Oliver introduces himself to them. Oliver then explains to the class that he was the one who came up with the idea of Class 7 after witnessing the combined efforts of the people in the borough during their crisis. He later reveals the truth about Sarah, that before she was their instructor she was actually a bracer, the youngest person to become an A-rank bracer in fact. The class then meet up with Sarah and Claire, where the latter sets up a meeting with the class informing them that there most likely will be a terrorist attack tomorrow. It's believed that the same people involved with the Celtic and Nord situation are the perpetrators behind this attack. With the summer festival in full swing, Class 7 begin to ask civilians for any suspicious activity. Class 7 then confirms Alphin's safety upon arriving to the garden party before meeting up with Toa, Angelica and Crow. However, that's when the water shoots out of multiple manholes. Class 7 return to Patter Park, where they find both Alphin and Elise held at gunpoint. When Class 7 tries to stop Gideon, he uses his flute to summon more monsters, while he and his allies retreat with both girls. They eventually catch up to Gideon in the catacombs when all of a sudden he summons a skeleton dragon. Though after defeating it, Reen destroys Gideon's flute, but that's when S, V and their leader C wails Gideon out. C takes on Class 7, though they are no match to him. They introduce themselves as being the Imperial Liberation Front before handing the hostages over and escaping. Crow and Milliam end up joining Class 7 as Crow was missing credits and Osborn wished to give Class 7 some extra help moving forward. One night, while on a request, Reen ends up bumping into a woman. He deduces that the woman must be Misty from Abin time as he recognises her voice from the times that he's listened to the radio show. Even though she's wearing glasses, he figures out that Misty is actually Vita, whom he met last chapter in Heimdall. Vita congratulates Reen by identifying her disguise, though also recognises that Reen has something special about him. Though she doesn't elaborate further, as she leaves, Reen can't help but notice the smell of lavender. The fragrance is so pungent that when Reen returns to the dorms, even Emma notices the smell. That same night, the ILF are having their meeting where Gideon accepts his mission to assassinate Osborn at the West Cimmerian Conference, though the others warn him that the Red Constellation will be there. The next morning, Sarah reveals the next field study with Reen going to Logram, whereas the other group is going to Durai. The group eventually arrive at the lakeside town where the group pass a statue of Saint Sandlot. Laura explains that the statue was built in honour of Saint Sandlot, who aided in the War of the Lions, with Laura wishing to match her skill in swordsmanship. The group is then surprised to see a bracer guild still being ran in Legram, as they have yet to come across an active guild in any other location so far. This is in relation to how guilds in Heimdall were targeted by terrorists, with Eustace explaining that there was none in Boreahad as his father pressured the guild to close a year prior. Upon entering the guild, the group is introduced to Toval, who explains the situation with the bracer guilds across Erebonia. As the RMP now do most of the bracers' jobs, the Erebonian bracers therefore transferred to other branches over Zemuria. After finishing their tasks, the group began to spar at the RSA training hall where they par with Klaus, who was the previous master before Victor took over the position. Though after sparring, Klaus also notices that Reen is holding back. The group are then greeted by Victor, where they share dinner together. Though again, Victor recognises that there's something troubling within Reen, which is odd for an 8 leaves 1 blade practitioner as Victor is familiar with young Kafai and even sparred with the man before. As such, Victor and Reen begin to duel, where Victor is able to get Reen to trigger his orb power, though it's still not enough to defeat the Blade Master. While everyone sleeps that night, Emma is seen talking with Celine about Reen on whether or not there is enough time to guide Reen. Emma then scolds Celine for the stunt that she pulled last chapter at the old schoolhouse. The next morning, the group asks Reen about his orb power, where he reveals that he's had the ability since he was a child. However, after seeing the aftermath of the power it could inflict, Reen began to fear this power. After finishing their tasks, they return to the Arcade household. They witness Duke Kyan with 2 bodyguards talking with Victor. Victor then reveals to the group that the Duke was inviting himself and other nobles to a conference in relation to the noble faction. Although Victor plans to go, he still plans to maintain his neutrality between the 2 political parties. Later that day, the group is informed about 2 children missing within the town. As a last resort, the group heads towards Lohengrin Castle to find the kids. The group is faced against fiends until they notice a door with similar markings to the ones found in the old schoolhouse. Eventually, they come across the boys, but a Nosferatu appears. The group believes they have defeated it until it unleashes one final attack. Incapable of doing anything, it's only when a lance destroys the source of the Nosferatu's power. Confused by this, the group heads towards the direction that the lance came from, believing it to be a woman with golden hair, though they ultimately find no one. Instead of returning to Trista, the group set on a train to make their way to Corellia Fortress. Though while at Celtic Station, both groups meet up and finally merge into the whole of Class 7. That is when they witness the train taking Oliver and Osborn to Crossbell for the West Cimmerian Conference. Class 7 then bear witness to the size of Corellia Fortress after approaching it. After arriving, they then get introduced to Elliot's father, Olaf, before watching a simulated battle using the latest tanks. The next day, the class is briefed on what is known of the terrorists that they met back in Heimdall. The first is Gideon, who is a professor at Heimdall Academy who specialised in political philosophy. V is then believed to be part of a Jaegerkorps, though not much else is known on either S or C. However, that's when the group is informed that Orcus Tower at Crossbell has been attacked by the ILF. All of a sudden, tanks at the fortress begin autopiloting, attacking nearby soldiers, and that's when the ILF airships begin to raid the fortress. Class 7 split into two groups to try and take back control. That's when Reen's group gets introduced to S. Her real name is Scarlet, and she mentions that Gideon may have already died at Orchid's Tower, but she still continues to fulfill his wish by using the railway cannons to kill Osborn. Though she is defeated by Reen's group, with V being defeated by the other group, the cannons are then stopped, though both terrorists manage to get away. With the school festival approaching, Sarah reveals the final field study to Class 7. Reen's group will be going to Aurora, whereas the other group will go to Ordus. However, unlike previous field studies, Oliver will be transporting the group on his new airship, the Courageous. Oliver then reveals his faction. It's a third faction to oppose both the Noble and Reformist faction. Oliver has entrusted Victor as the captain of the airship, as well as inviting Toval to be part of his faction as a source of information. Reen's group then arrives in Aurora, where they bear witness to the industrialness of the city. After completing some tasks, they witness an altercation between the Provisional Army and the RMP. Though it's thanks to both Claire and Rufus that the two groups stopped arguing, that night, while the group is resting at Lisa's penthouse, Reen gets a call from Claire inviting him to a private meeting. Although Fee tags along, Claire shares her suspicion of the Noble Alliance as she believes that they are helping the ILF. The RMP are therefore trying to force an inspection on the Rhineford Company to try and find any evidence that the factories are helping the Noble faction in any way. Reen shares this information with Elisa, who informs which factories align with which faction, before they begin their own investigation onto the matter. However, their investigation is stopped when one of the factories is set on fire. That's when Reen's group tries to rescue as many workers as possible. Claire and the RMP manage to take control of the situation, though Claire wonders where the provisional soldiers were before being informed of another terrorist attack at the Sashin mine. Both groups make their way to the mine, where they see provisional soldiers guarding it as they claim that the terrorists are holding hostages within. Reen's group returns to Aurora, where they meet with Angelica and George, who are both suspicious of Count Rogner. This is because, from the help of Toa, it seems that the factory that Angelica's uncle runs has been selling iron ore on the black market. Since Angelica is very familiar with the layout of the mines, she plans to help save the hostages. After obtaining a card to a secret passageway into the mines from Arena, the group manages to save the first group of hostages. Crow then volunteers to take the hostages back to the surface to prevent any harm to them, while the group continues further into the mine. They eventually come across V, who introduces himself as Vulcan, who is a member of the Ongarma Jägerkorps. That was until Osborn was responsible for the death of his Jägerkorps with no mercy. But that's when C bails the man out by fighting the group as well. Both men get on their airship, but before they can escape, someone off-screen shoots the aircraft down, causing it to explode. After dealing with the terrorists, Class 7 is invited to a meeting with the royal family, where they are praised for their bravery. Oliver then recommends the group to have a short vacation. Class 7 accepts this recommendation and visit Ymir. They take in the view, and Reen reunites with his family after not seeing them for 6 months. Reen then receives a letter from young Kafai, who has visited the area 2 months prior. In it, Kafai reassures Reen with the saying, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form," in regard to the void form Kafai had taught Reen. However, the snow has begun to fall heavier than usual, which prevents the group from leaving via cable car. Reen is reminded of something similar happening 8 years ago. That is until the group receives a letter on how to stop the blizzard. After going to Ymir Valley, they are faced with a beast. It's here where Reen begins to control his orc power to an extent, which allows the group to defeat the beast. But Blanca reveals himself to them, where he tells him that he's Enforcer before leaving. Upon returning to Ymir, the snow has calmed down when Reen's father gives him a scroll entrusted by Kafai. This scroll promotes Reen to intermediate level of the 8 Leaves 1 Blade technique after taking some control over his Augur power. As the Thor's Academy Festival is almost in fruition, Crow informs Reen that their costumes for their performance needs to be picked up. As a result, Reen and a character of your choosing will drive to Heimdall using Angelica's Orbital bike. While waiting outside, Reen will notice a blue bird, though if you bring Emma, she will question where the bird went before running away. That's when Misty bumps into Reen and wishes him to tune into her next show. After driving away, the bird is then seen returning to its master. That night, Reen then overhears of Crossbell's declaration of independence over the radio. Suddenly, the old schoolhouse begins to glow with Class 7 entering it and going down to the 7th floor. That is when they are greeted by a sealed door. The second trial begins as the door opens that Reen and Class 7 begin to venture through. Eventually, they make their way to the end of the dungeon where they come across the final door that holds a fragment of the Great Power. Upon entering, Class 7 is faced with Lower Erebonius on the otherworldly battlefield. After defeating the creature, the word Valamar is spelled out in front of Reen before the group returns back to the 7th floor of the old schoolhouse. That's when they are shown a giant mech, though they opt to leave it where it is. Near the end of the school festival, a dance is held. That is when Claire receives a call which causes her to escort both Oliver and Elfin back to Heimdall. That's when Van Dyke informs the students that Corellia Fortress had been obliterated. Over the coming days, the effects of the IPC freezing all assets is hitting Erebonia. With what's happening with Crossbell, classes are cancelled as Osborn plans to address the population, informing them what their plan is. That's when Reen realizes both Milliam and Crow are missing. Misty then begins her broadcast where Emma is surprised by the woman's voice. That's when Misty begins to talk directly to Class 7 before chanting an incantation that allows the class to see Osborn's speech. But that's not the most surprising thing though, as mid-speech, we see C aiming a rifle at Osborn before shooting the man. Claire manages to catch up to C, but she's too late. After blasting his helmet, the real identity is revealed to be Crow. Chaos ensues as the Noble faction then reveals their airship before releasing soldats onto Heimdall. Crow then flees using a mech similar to the one found within the old schoolhouse. Rita is then seen embracing the chaos before LeBlanc compliments the second Anguis as the phantasmal blaze plan is ready to move to Erebonia. These soldiers then begin to raid Trista, though while the staff are able to fend off one side of Thor's, Sharon aids them as she reveals herself to be Enforcer 9. However, her actions do not reflect Ouroboros', but rather her duty to defend Elisa as a servant to the Rhineford Company. That's when Classum try to fend off the other entrance at Thor's. That's when they witness Scarlet piloting a Soldat. Her mech is too strong for the group, but with the help of Celine, Rena is able to summon Valma, the Ashen Divine Knight, to help fight Scarlet. Although she is defeated, Crow then appears with his own Divine Knight, the Azure Knight, where he defeats Reen. As a last resort, Celine forces Valma to retreat to Reen's objection.